Chat. I am Lindsay.
And I am Genevieve Marie. Hello and welcome.
Yes, we are so excited today because obviously tomorrow is Thanksgiving. We've got, all the other holidays around the town, coming up soon. So we are going to dive into that. But first, we're going to kick it off with just a little bit of news. There's some exciting things that have happened this week.
Oh, I want turkey. I'm going to get so fat tomorrow.
Oh,
yeah. So news. So collectors and DMs get ready because WizKids is coming out with a new replica of the Yawning Portal Inn. It's actually about time for this. I'm just saying. Anyway, it's coming, and it's coming next year. The intricate 3-story terrain piece will be released next year, and it is running at a hefty sum of $350. So you know who's not gonna get that? This girl.
Is there going to be a Black Friday deal? Can we pre-order tomorrow and they'll give us, I don't know, $20 off?
When they say next year, I'm assuming next year. When they say next year without a month attached to it, I'm assuming next year means December of next year.
Right. It's every video game that came out this year. It's it's being pushed to,
to the very last day of December, so we can still call it a 2020 game.
Speaking of video games, all of you World of Warcraft All you World of Warcraft players, Shadowlands came out. So if you have not started playing it, you really should. It's fantastic. There are 5 new zones that you can discover. There's some pretty cool new characters in it. You might hear a voice. I don't know. I'm just saying there might be a voice in there that you hear. But but yeah, no, it's and of course, Blizzard always kills it with World of Warcraft, and this new game, there's some really interesting new characters and places to discover. So, okay, all right, let's bring it back to why we're here. So, with the holidays, we thought it was perfect to highlight this thing, the Heroes Feast. And so we are so privileged to have the authors of the Heroes Feast here. We have Kyle Newman, John Peterson, Michael Whitworth. Thank you so much for being here, guys.
Yes, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
So, shall we go down the line? For those people who don't already know who you guys are, John, let's start with you, please.
So I'm John Peterson, and this team, you may know, was also responsible for a book that was called Art and Arcana, which came out 2018. It was kind of a history of D&D, nice coffee table book as well, very similar. And unfortunately, Sam Whitwer could not join us in this project due to some other commitments he had. He worked with us on Art and Arcana, but this is the Heroes Feast team here. We were responsible for that. I'm John. I am a researcher who studies the history of war games and role-playing games, but I will throw it to Kyle. You're muted, Kyle.
Kyle is muted.
There. I am Kyle Newman, and I am a proud member of this group we loosely call the Arcanists. Sam is our other member, and like he said, he couldn't be here for this one, but we've got some stuff coming up, and Sam will be joining. And this is I'm a filmmaker by day, and by night I do this writing and exploring and D&D adventuring with these guys, and it is an absolute pleasure. So I'll pass it to Michael, and Michael is Sam's brother, so we've got siblings in the team.
That's right. That's how we do it. I'm Michael Whitwer, last and certainly least, Michael Whitwer. So I'm the third leg to this stool on this book, and have really enjoyed the hell out of working with these gentlemen again. And this project was so damn fun. I can't even tell you. I'm an author and have been for a while. I got into this business a few years ago. I wrote a book called Empire of Imagination, which was a biography about Gary Gygax, the founder of D&D, the co-creator, I should say, of D&D. And before that, I'd known John, and all the historians of the space really did, because John really wrote the seminal work that helped untangle a lot of the history of this book, a brilliant book called Playing at the World. That was a really important source for a lot of us that kind of write about this in the space. Kyle, of course, approached me a couple years later when he had this idea to do this D&D art book that, of course, became Art and Arcana. And then, of course, that brings us here today with this really fun D&D cookbook of all things, something I never thought I would do or say, but here we are. So thanks for having us.
Well, I guess let's dive right into it. I mean, all of you guys, your collective knowledge of D&D is just, well, I mean, chat, if you can see, like, all of those books behind John are all D&D related books. What was the impetus behind this? I mean, you'd done Art and Arcana, which, Michael, you were saying was like archaeology research to put that together. What made you guys decide this time to be like, let's do a cookbook?
I mean, I can jump in on that one. So I'm very happy to say we didn't come up with this all on our own. Again, we all like food very much, but it was our publisher that brought us the idea, and it just proved to be a really, really well thought out idea. The story behind it is simply this: he's the publisher of a few different imprints at Penguin Random House, and one of them, of course, is 10 Speed, who published this book and a lot of other books like it. He also publishes Clarkson Potter. And Clarkson Potter is the imprint of Ina Garden, Barefoot Contessa, among other things. So he publishes some of the biggest cookbooks out there. He knows the space. So he came to us when we were wrapping up Art and Arcana and said, hey, the project has gone so well. We're thrilled with it. You really know the space. Would you be interested in teaming up with us on building a D&D cookbook? Something he'd been thinking about for a while. And so that's how we got involved with it. And we started going back and forth, really bouncing ideas off each other about how we could do, frankly, a D&D cookbook that wasn't gimmicky. That was one of our primary objectives, this notion that how do we do a cookbook that actually enhances the game experience, that actually fits into D&D and makes those game nights even better than they already are. So that was kind of the primary objective. We got with Wizards, we threw out a bunch of ideas, and we started developing together this kind of bigger conceptual idea. And of course, our publisher surrounded us with some of the absolute best talent in the cookbook business to make that a reality. So that's how it all kind of came about.
That's so cool. Do either of you guys have anything to add on to that?
When we were talking about how we would follow up Art and Arcana, and we had a few ideas, a few things in the works, and it did come out of left field. But I think it was something we vetted collectively, and we said, you know what? If there's a unique way to do this where it's not just recipes that are named after D&D things, where we can actually go and look back on the history and extract ingredients or concepts or terms and figure out what that was, and also go back to some of those classic books like the Dragonlance Leaves books, or some of the Volo's guides, which included recipes, or the Aurora's Guide, which also had lists of ingredients and types of foods. If we could go and mine all that, explore it, and then add another layer and dimension, another aspect to your gaming experience by giving you things that were germane to maybe the campaign you're playing, or the setting you're in, or the culture, character you're playing. Then we felt like, okay, this is an opportunity to not just do a cookbook, but to actually go and add these other dimensions and almost treat it like a player's handbook, but for the cultural aspects. And they were all about it. So we were like, okay, then this is like a good pairing. Like, this is a way for us to put our unique skills to good use and make a book that we would, as fans and players ourselves. Right. Then we're like, okay, this is worth the time. Let's do it. So we were encouraged by everybody.
Yeah. So yeah, building off of that, based on, I guess, the research and your knowledge of the lore in D&D, is there something in the cookbook that is like a real deep dive, or maybe like an Easter egg to people that are like, oh, that was from whatever,
I'll give you one.
I saw you nodding.
So there are a couple of these. And some of these in jokes are so in that I hesitate to even reveal them. I want them to be things that other people find and will eventually unearth from this. But
you want
so Michael is pointing to the cover, to the back cover especially, and the wraparound cover art of the book. It's very referential to some of the D&D covers familiar from second edition, or from first edition. You'll see the Dungeon Master's Guide. You'll see Unearthed Arcana referenced in it. But I was going to go to a weird place on this because people have already seen this on the Twitter, as they know this is true. we have a recipe in there for something called orc bacon. And this is actually a reference to the fact that in the early 1980s, at the time that D&D was really a fad, this was when the game exploded. Among the licenses that Dungeons and Dragons, the TSR issued at the time, they licensed Oscar Mayer to make meat products, not in America, but in Europe,
Okay.
that have the D&D brand on them, including bacon. And because of that, this was an in-joke with TSR staff in the late 1980s, early 1990s, this orc bacon concept. So we had to do orc bacon as a reference to this very, very in-joke kind of thing that TSR staffers would know. But there are a bunch of those. There are a bunch of things like that hidden away in there for the discerning to discover.
Wow.
Insane. That's kind of like the Japanese Spider-Man, where it's like very in like only the country that it was in would know it, and then now you got this like whole wealth of information that's coming out because people are getting so interested in the culture and learning the history and stuff.
Yeah.
But that's great. So when you make a cookbook, you obviously have to test the recipes, could you guys give us like kind of a walkthrough of that process of like testing what works, what didn't? Did you have a team behind you that are chefs and cooks to do that? Were you guys involved in the taste testing and stuff yourselves? Can you just walk us through the process a bit?
Kyle, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
I would say before we can even get to the taste testing, it was the conceptualization. So we had to really generate a master list of all the types of foods, all the things that maybe been referenced, a Dragonlance novel or a Forgotten Realms book, or something that's in a third edition book, or what's talked about in Eberron, and like aggregate all those things, and then look at what are those types of foods. And we're talking soups and breads and desserts and starters and breakfasts and main courses and things that are too exotic to even include. And we had to just generate this big list and figure out what's feasible, what even a menu could be. And then we whittled it down to a place where we felt like this would make a well-curated, palatable, quote unquote menu for each of the different cultures. And then within that became the testing and the balancing, and a lot of that went to Adam Reed at America's Test Kitchen, and we would go and say, we're thinking a dish like this, and we're gonna, it's gonna intercept it with a concept like this to something to go a little left of center, a little bit D&D, or this is what makes it special and unique. And then he would come back and try and balance it in an alchemical, delicious way, so it could, be a fresh take on something maybe familiar. That was always our goals. How can we give something familiar? Because a lot of, if you go into a D&D, they talk about stew, and they talk about, mutton, and they talk about roasts and all these things. But like, what are those ingredients that just make them unique? And so that's where it was us picking these concepts of what they could be based on what would be available in these different planets or these different regions. And then Adam trying to activate those to life with practical recipes. And then, when we were shooting, we did get to taste a lot of things, but a lot of it was done mainly conceptually with Adam, defaulting to his expertise as a chef and saying, well, I think what you really need, if it's a drink, he's like, I think this will go really well with this. And this is an accent we might be missing in order to accentuate this flavor. So he could bring that angle into it to take the concept that we had come to another level.
Oh, wow.
It
Okay.
took a lot of layers of work, and a lot of, brainstorming, teamwork, whittling down, vetting, and then refining. So it had all those stages beyond the writing, just of what's the palette of this? What are the ingredients and why?
Right.
And I mean, among our team, I'd say Mike was really the beta tester. Mike was the one who made so many of these recipes while this is in production, and who had notes. This I don't know, the salt on this is a little too much, maybe, or yeah.
How many did you take, Michael?
I've made about 70 of the 80 dishes.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Photographed them. You'll probably see on Twitter, I keep photography. That's my own. I thought, I might as well just use this. To kind of put it out there. But it's that was part of it for me. It was a really fun way to really get connected to the material. I love learning new things. And that's one reason I love writing books, especially books that stretch me like this, where, you know, I would never pretend to be anything other than kind of a level 1 chef. But it was an opportunity for me to work really closely with my wife and cook these things for our kids. You know, and actually have it was kind of a spring and a summer full of these dishes. So we ate really well over that period of time, you can imagine. And we'd always find things. It was really cool.
Yeah.
You know, I have no doubt at times we were driving Adam crazy because the reality of how the dishes would go back and forth. Now, keep in mind, as I mentioned before, 10 Speed surrounded us with just an unbelievable team. The people involved, our editor, for example, was a professional chef. The food photography, the props people, I mean, these were like the highest level people you could get in the space. This big project team. But I'm sure we drove them crazy at times because what would happen is when we would conceptualize a dish, let's, for example, say we would find something from Forgotten Realms somewhere that we thought, oh, here's a dish from this tavern, no problem. And we would describe it, no doubt. And what we would typically do is we'd write a head note, a conceptual head note, which when I say that, those are, of course, those little write-ups that you'll see in front of every dish in the book. So if we had enough information at that point, we would write the head note and say, Adam, here's what the dish is. And by the way, this is like a roast or something. We would give him a little bit of feedback on it and the history. He would go conceptualize it. And then very, frequently that would come back to us as some type of developed recipe. And a lot of the time, we were like, oh no, we forgot to tell them they don't have mushrooms in this part of, it would be some obscure thing that we would find from our history knowledge. And so we'd have to have them go back to the drawing board to make some adjustments. So in that respect, it was a hugely collaborative, really strange project because you wouldn't expect a book like this would be so deep on research. But as it happens, the research, of course, was on fictional stuff. We were digging through novels and adventures and core books and all kinds of things. And we were just making sure to be as true to canon as we could be. And sometimes that meant changing a recipe to make sure to get it right. So that if anyone ever walks out of the D&D universe and tastes one of these, they'll be like, oh yeah, they got this right. So
right. Well, and that's I mean, you're literally taking like an anthropological approach to this cookbook. I mean, you think about people who are putting cookbooks together based on like, ethnic cooking or, cooking that's based on a certain region of the world. And like you just said, like, oh, there's no mushrooms in this part of the world. This herb doesn't exist in this part of the world. It's exactly the same approach. I don't think anyone's done that before for any sort of fantasy cookbook that I can think of, but you would probably know better than I would.
Well, we looked at a lot of comparable titles, things that like the Game of Thrones cookbook would be a good example of this, right? And I mean, just in some respects, we were jealous because I mean, in the Game of Thrones books, food, there's a narrative that goes through the story and you can read about the Red Wedding, like what was served there. It's like in the book, right? And, but D&D is much more DIY, right? It's much more kind of what people bring to these worlds. And so, I mean, we tried to go with canon. We did do quite a bit of research and it took us to a bunch of weird places. Like, we knew we wanted to have some kind of like veggie burger sort of thing, like an Impossible Burger. Yeah. And, it took us some time to connect that to a module called the Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, which, was released in around 1980. It was originally a tournament that Gary Gygax had run himself in 1976, but it had this reference in it to the existence of surrogate stakes. So this comes down to the fact that the whole module is predicated on the idea that a spaceship crashed, like in a D&D world. And so it's kind of like a sci-fi thing with like androids and stuff. And we found this obscure reference in like, a pantry in this crashed spaceship that there were surrogate stakes. And so that then becomes what we tap into for the lore of this to justify, I guess, having our Impossible Burgers in it. We did a lot of gymnastics like that to get this to work.
Well, and I think that's one of the really interesting things about this cookbook is that it really is accessible to the modern age. I mean, I'm personally vegan and I'm like, I've never gotten like fantasy cookbooks. Like, of course I'd love the Middle Life, but I'll open it and I'll be like, there's nothing in here I can eat. It's still cool. But, when I was looking through these recipes, I was like, oh, I can make this, I can eat this, so it's not something that's too obscure that, the layperson can't just pick up this cookbook and be like, oh, this just seems really cool.
And to that respect, I'm sorry, Kyle.
Sorry, Michael, go.
Oh, just pointing out that I'm really glad you were able to actually find a lot of things that were accessible to you. You know, one of the challenges, again, not being able to just pull everything off the page, as John suggested, right? There's a lot of fantasy canon out there in more narrative-based things where, yeah, you can just pull it off the page and kind of say, oh, here's what it is. This, you know, this was a lot more challenging. I don't know if it's more challenging, but it was certainly a challenge to figure out how to make that all work. And one of the ways we did it was to figure out how to be able to extrapolate and think like different cultures within the D&D world. So that was kind of the other big piece of the research, was spending a lot of time defining the palette, the etiquette, the common ingredients of these different fantasy cultures, like elves, which is one reason, of course, why there's a lot of vegetarian and vegan dishes in the book, is because elves, what we found out when we did a lot of study on them, is that, you know, these are cultures that typically, and again, I don't mean to throw elves all together. Of course, there's different types of elves in different places, but they typically don't eat meat in most examples that you find, or they don't eat very much meat. You know, a wood elf might hunt venison, something like that. But by and large, a lot of these dishes happen to be vegan or vegetarian. So it created a kind of a narrative backdrop that could help drive our decision making with regard to what to put into the book, and even for Adam for how to create these dishes. So that was a really neat aspect. And in that respect, we really did just approach it as a D&D core book. As Kyle said before, we thought of this book as the player's handbook for food. Let's just dig into all the detail you'd ever want to know about the eating habits, the dining, ingredients, palette of every culture, and let's just structure it like like a core book. So that's kind of how we thought about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, really stratifying it in those ways where, you know, things like citrus might not be available to dwarves just based on how they grow or source their food, or gnomes or drow live primarily underground. So what types of things are going to be available to them? What's in freshwater lakes underground? What's fungus might be growing, things like that. Whereas maybe livestock's not readily available. And also just when you're getting into human culture, coastal living versus people that live more inland or mountainous. Then there's the dwarves, some of them that live split time between the surface and below ground. And so there's all those variables, and then you have to look at it per planet, because we're not just talking where there's Toril and we're going to Eberron, and there's all these varied planets, and each of those have their own unique, all of those cultures are represented in their own ways. Elves, a wood elf on one planet is different than a wood elf on another. So it was so expansive. So it was really hard to cull it together, but to find that shorthand. What is that vernacular that you would say? What are those benchmarks of elves in general, or at least high elves and wood elves, and looking at it like that, so we could codify it. But we made those honest discoveries. I'm sure they're out there and they're in the text, but it was at least re-examining them and drawing those parallels, like John was saying, unearthing those little secrets and trying to program those things. And if you don't get it, that's cool. If you don't know barrier peaks, it's fine. It still works as this type of dish and it has this great backstory. But if you do, there's those extra layers. So there's a thought process into every single one. So we didn't want to just, you know, jam anything in there because the name was clever. We all were like, why is this here? And is it here to elevate what was previously there? And is it worthy of inclusion? Just like we did with Art and Arcana, everything had to be vetted and we would look at it from all these different angles. We did the same thing here. So I felt like even though it was food and it wasn't necessarily our primary focus in our other jobs, we could apply that same level of scrutiny and passion and care. And we didn't want to just be frivolous about how we added to the D&D lexicon. We really wanted to aggregate the information and thoughtfully step it forward if it was an enhancement. And sometimes we take old recipes and we revisit them. You want to talk about like spiced potatoes, Michael, or anything like some of the legendary dishes that are in here that we've cut to rethink and why?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good example. And, you know, and there's an example of one, you know, John mentions like the Red Wedding. There's an example where there was some really good text that supported a particular dish. And I actually can't tell you how many comments I've seen, notes I've seen about people, how much they appreciated us bringing Oddix fried spiced potatoes to this book. I think there was some concern, like, gosh, it's probably literally the most famous D&D food from any D&D literature. In this particular case, it's from the Dragonlance, the original Dragonlance trilogy. And they're always talking about Oddix famous fried spiced potatoes. And, you know, And so, like, that's the kind of dish, you kind of have to include, right? And that's a good example of the stuff that kind of, falls right off the tree. There's a lot of explanation about what the dish is. You kind of have a general sense of what it is. So there's a good one that you feel like you kind of have to include. It was kind of everything else that was more challenged to figure out, what it was. There was probably a dozen of those types of things. Everything else took a lot more, I think study, a good example being John's discovery in the Barrier Peaks module. Things like that is kind of more common in this book.
And I mean, I'd say as well, like iron rations is one that we hear all the time. Does this have an iron rations recipe? Everyone wants to know what iron rations actually is. And so we knew we needed to do that. And we knew it shouldn't be like, it's not an elegant dish. It has to be palatable. It has to keep you alive. But, finding out the way to thread that needle to make something actually like tastes okay, but is plausibly something a dungeon adventurer could have like a week after they're down in the dungeon, that will still keep, that they can still eat, that will, make them ready to take on the next kobold. Things like that were a bit of a challenge.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like the gingerbread men, John.
The gingerbread men.
Yeah, the llama spread you're like, oh, do I want to eat this? But yeah.
I mean, our research was basically, it's like trail mix, right? It's basically, you get some trail mix, you get a little bit of hard cheese to work well, some preserved meats, like sausages, things like that. Things that, like more salami side sausages. Things like that, they'll keep. You could have those in your pack where you're an adventurer. So if anybody wants to live out their D&D experience, I think our iron rations will keep you alive for your subterranean adventure.
So there you go. To all the LARPers in the chat for your next, when we're not quarantined, there you go.
and for our vegetarian friends, there is Quithpaw as well, which is elven iron rations. Another holdover from Dragonlance. And those are these delicious little apricot balls that are covered in coconut. They're pretty good. So if you want a different type of iron ration, we do have Quithpaw as well, which I do recommend.
Awesome. So I know a lot of these fantasy cookbooks, I mean, even a cookbook like The Hunger Games, their cookbook really focuses on Western style cooking. Like it's all very Western culture style cooking, but with D&D, you have all these different realms and lands, and like they all kind of mimic cultures that we have here in our world. Was it and so it kind of gives you a space in order to be, I wouldn't say inclusive, but kind of be able to explore and put your fingers. Even regular cookbooks out there have sort of it's like Irish cooking or focus on Middle Eastern cooking. Was this something that you guys really just kind of leaned into, like being able to pick and choose and kind of have run the gambit of all different cultures of cooking, and how did you put that in, how did you put that together in like one cohesive menu?
We definitely wanted a diverse smorgasbord of food. We didn't want to just lean into Euro tradition. And like you said, D&D is so diverse, topographically, economically, geographically, everything. There's these worlds, and those worlds have rich cultures, and they dot the globe. Obviously, if you're on Tyrell, Forgotten Realms takes, most of the limelight, but there are these other regions. So we wanted to make sure, and there's a great map in there. The Barnes & Noble Special Edition features a great fold-out map by Jared Blando, and that lets you see more of the globe and where some of these famous ingredients, whether it's honey or certain types of fish or like knucklehead trout, things like it, where are they indigenous to? And so you get a sense globally that, okay, we're going to touch on all these regions and not just what dots the Sword Coast. So our goal was to do that for all of the planets. And we really get into 4. We get into Earth and Greyhawk. We get into Eberron. We get into Tyrell and the Forgotten Realms. And we get into Krynn and Dragonlance. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't overbalance it towards, human-centric food or Western or American food. So even when we get into teas, like John, had a great conceptual stuff with one of the teas and borrowing from things that he had an adoration for in a Japanese tea. So finding ways to integrate a wider breadth of concepts and tastes, And obviously there's things like manticore steaks and in these books, and you can't, or what is an abyssal chicken? Is this? So they're featured in books, 5th edition and back, but some of them couldn't actually. Some of our favorite or more conceptually unique dishes, maybe like a fire spice. A tiefling fire spice would probably kill a human. So you can talk about it, but you can't really make a recipe that mimics it, because it wasn't good. But you want to talk about things like that, or the menus. Each section is anchored by a menu from a famous inn or tavern or restaurant from these different worlds. And sometimes we populate them with real recipe or real dishes that we couldn't create recipes for. So you as a dungeon master might pick up this menu with the pricing and be like, what is this? And it might spark you to talk about other food that you can't actually make. But on every level, both on a fantasy level and on a practical, cultural level, what's available to us as humans who buy the book and want to make this stuff, we tried to make it programmed to be as diverse as possible. So there was a great array, and not just like group food. We want food for if you're a solo adventurer, like what's your home by yourself, what's doable, or that I don't want to sit and cook. I'm having 6 people over to game. Do I really want to get a ribs night and get greasy? Maybe it's better to just do something that's pre-made, like a hand pie, so we can eat those at the break. Or maybe you have more time to do something like that, or maybe you just need a dessert. So there's just different ways to approach the book based on what you might need for your game night, or if you're doing something solo or for a big group. So we wanted all those types of options on the table.
Yeah, I have to say, cooking for being single that was the worst experience of that patch of my life was just, that is so hard. So thank you for covering that for people.
Yep. People like us who are at home with their cats.
Right. Well, now I cook for 2, so it's a lot easier. But when I was cooking for 1, oh my gosh, you have to have every single recipe. Sometimes you have to quarter it. But yes, so thank you for covering that for people.
Well, and that brings up a good point in that, one of the things that we all love about D&D is the cultural aspect. Obviously we're quarantined here, but, we're still able to play virtually. But, it's that communal experience of coming together, playing a game together, being an adventuring party together. And, again, anthropologically speaking, food has always been a very cultural experience, and that's how people express themselves and come together. Obviously tomorrow is Thanksgiving. Was that something that you guys had in mind when you were putting this together? You're like, okay, you know what? Our party is going to sit down, our 6 players, and, have this feast or, whatever.
I think definitely we actually have a section at the end of the book that's called Playing with Your Food, that talks a bit about just ground rules for okay, if you're the DM, maybe don't cook yourself. If you're hosting people at your house, you're doing enough work as a DM. Get your players to make the food. If there's guidelines on if you're going to your friendly local gaming shop to play. What'll work well with that, right? Where probably all you've got is a microwave if you're lucky, right? And maybe a faucet. What can you bring that'll work in an environment like that? What cleans up well? What don't you need utensils for? So we really gave a lot of thought to that, actually. And obviously, we're all very much looking forward to the time we can get back together and be able to play in person with all our friends like that. But it is a huge part of the experience. Your D&D players are your companions, and the literal meaning of the word companion is the people you break bread with, right? And that, so that was very resonant for us as we worked on the book.
Yeah, D&D groups are families.
Yeah.
And I'm DM for a group, and I would also cook. So people would come over and I would make soups and tacos, and 2 groups. One I didn't DM, but I hosted at my house, and the other one I DM'd and hosted. And I would always cook, and people were like, you're doing so much. I'm like, but I like that. I like the experience, and I've yet to be able to cook from our book and put stuff out there, but the Qualinesti stew was a variation on a ratatouille, and I would make that and people loved it, and I would make these different soups and people loved. So I think that's a big part. You become these little families, and families eat together, and these D&D families play together, and invariably you have to eat together. So why not eat good food, and why not eat food that adds this extra layer enhanced dimension potentially to your game. So that's what I can't wait to do. Me as the fan is like dive into the book and we're prepping a night and diving into something elven or halfling. You know, just what makes a halfling unique. If you want to play a halfling, read this book and see what makes a halfling tick, what makes their stomach think for them. So like learn about a halfling in this way more than just what you get in the player's handbook. That's great, that's your foundation. But if you want to like get into it a little more and see like how they approach like meals and family and things like that, this is a cool way to add like layers to your character too.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sure everyone is thinking this, but what are your favorite recipes in the book?
I'm happy to start on that one. My favorite single recipe was there's a couple. I did love the Qualinesti stew. That's that ratatouille dish. It's just a gorgeous dish. It's a vegetarian dish, really really delicious. Dragon salmon was my favorite. That's also actually in the Elven section. It's a half elf dish from Eberron. That dish, if you know salmon, if you love salmon, has just the most extraordinary sauce. Again, credit to Adam Reed on that one. You know, we give him the conceptual ideas, but we're not telling him what ingredients to put in there. The dragon salmon is out of this world if you're a salmon lover. And you know, I mean, to be a little bit broader in terms of scope, my personal preference was I loved absolutely almost everything in the Elven and Halfling section. Those are like almost all my favorite dishes are from those two sections. And that's not to say anything bad about the other sections, which are also really delicious. But for some reason,
You were saying?
I think I was saying that my favorite section was the drinks section, but that's just me. Certainly, I think we had a lot of good options for cocktails. I guess the leaded ones are of most interest to me. I know a couple times when we've done live events like this, I've actually made the Mind Flayer cocktail live as we do these things. It's always precarious, but there are phenomenal cocktail options, I think, in that section of the book. If you want to press me on food, I mean, I really like the Ved bread. When we did the photo shoot for the book, this was actually the first time I had it, was when we're doing the food photography. And of course, that whole process was just so much fun to bring all these. We brought props, we helped set them up. And the best part was, of course, though, after we did the food photography, someone needed to eat the food. And that often became our job. And that at that time, the Ved bread really knocked me out. So I recommend that highly. Kyle, what about you? What was your favorite recipe?
Ooh, breakfast. I like the stuffed egg battered toast, halfling dish. I would say for like a dinner. I was really surprised. I got to cook it on camera at for one of the D&D events. Was the pan fried knucklehead trout? Yum, very good. I do love the stuffing in the turkey. I'm gonna just put it out there. If you're making turkey tomorrow, go for that stuffing. It's a sausage stuffing. Why not?
Ooh.
Make a delicious sausage. I mean, I live for the day of the year, and I'm in Canada right now, and I have no Thanksgiving tomorrow. So I have no turkey skin, and I have no stuffing, and I'm just daydreaming about that sausage stuffing. Dessert, I would say Meal's End is pretty good. It's like a variation on an eaten mess. And I don't drink, but I do love the drink section. Maybe I'd pick it. Our cocoa drink is pretty delicious. It's a nice take on a hot chocolate.
That sounds really tasty. So obviously the holidays are a little different this year, but you know, in putting this cookbook out and in doing all this research and getting it together, what is something that you really want people to be able to get from this cookbook? You've mentioned you think it's like a player's guide, you know, the player's handbook for food, you know, but in just seeing the sales on it, I'm pretty sure people beyond D&D are buying this cookbook. So what are some of the things that you're hoping like people will experience or get from this cookbook?
well, I mean, one thing that I think this game has done really well, and I'd like to hope that our book will play a part in this, is just connecting people. So maybe right now 2 people in a group will make the same dish and they can talk about it. I think food as connection was one of our original objectives, our original goals. And so I don't know that particular objective has changed at all with the last 8 or 9 months. It's a little bit different than we expected. I admit, we expected, again, people to get together and make the halfling oatmeal cookies and enjoy those. That's obviously not what's happening right now. But what is encouraging, perhaps, is that people are buying this book and a lot of other books, obviously with an imminent hope that they will be getting together soon, again, at the same table to eat and to play D&D. So that's what's kind of exciting about it. So again, I hope connection is, if in a word, I would say that's what I want this book to do, is connect people to each other and to the game.
Yeah, I mean, I would piggyback on that. I like the game connection part. I like, the offer that we're making in this book for people to be able to just get a bit closer for what it'd be like for this to be real. I mean, we kind of had an awesome responsibility doing this in some ways, because a lot of, the previous D&D books, when they showed us pictures of the D&D world, their art, right? There's not a lot of photography. If you go back through the history and all the books you see behind me of, in books that try to convey to you what it is to be in Eberron or the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or, Krynn, right? And I think, the thing that I love most about it is how close it gets us to those worlds, and how, it just gives us this ability to maybe feel a bit more viscerally, like in your belly, another real sense of visceral, what it is to be a part of a world like that, a fantasy world.
Yeah, for me, it's like Michael said, and the connectivity, and it's the community. What I've found since I've kind of re-engaged and started playing D&D again in the last 5 years, was community. What got me so excited is this really vibrant, strong, unified, diverse community. And I was like, this is a way to get people together and talking and looking at D&D in an entirely new way. Maybe it creates a little subsect of it. And we were hoping we'd get people posting their pictures and sharing their dishes. And you're incentivized as players and dungeon masters to homebrew and create your own stuff in the game. And why not do that with this? I'd love to see variations on stuff and how you accent it. And maybe you roll a D6 to determine your meat of choice and add some randomness to it, just like D&D. That's what I like. And I like that, seeing how the community is going to respond to it. And, we were honored to be allowed to play in this sandbox and to extrapolate on what's come before. There's been, the foundation's been set by these, geniuses that in game design and conceptual guys. Ed Greenwood, what sprang out of his head, and being able to go into that world and explore it and try to study it a bit, and then add a dimension. That's just, for me on a personal level, it was like, I was honored, and that's when we take lightly when we do any D&D book. We feel like we treat it with such care, to make sure that it's vetted from so many different angles, and that we're just not putting something out for the sake of doing it. Otherwise, the 3 of us, the 4 of us, would say we would never collectively do a book just to put our name on something that's just, right. Oh, no one's done this before, let's just do it. This is not just a D&D cookbook. We want this to be the D&D cookbook, and do it right, and maybe do more.
Well, that's the point. It's not just the cookbook, because if everyone buys it, then there could be a sequel. It could happen. Not saying that's going to happen, but you never know. Everybody goes out and buys one.
You've already promised it to us.
I know. You heard it here, folks. We're getting a sequel.
I'm sorry.
The expansion pack coming soon.
By floating the idea, it's already a reality in my mind. I'm sorry.
It will be different. If we were to do a sequel book, it would have to be different. I don't think it would be it just wouldn't be 80 more recipes. There would be a new way.
Yeah.
Look, that's why we would go back and revisit and try to do something.
It would be like Iron Rations, the book, just 75 different types of iron rations that will.
You say that jokingly, but I feel like you've already planned this out. He's not denying it.
How not to make the trail dull.
Yeah. So, I mean, you jokingly mentioned a sequel, but you know, you guys already have a track record of working together. You've done some amazing stuff already. Do you have anything that you can talk about? Like, are you plotting your next thing that you're going to create, or?
We have something in the works for sure.
That's
NDA?
the smile. That's like the NDA smile on
Yeah.
all three of your faces.
No, we can't talk about exactly what it is, but we have something in the works. Obviously, we're going to continue the collaboration and our partnership with both 10 Speed and with Wizards. They've been nothing but kind, supportive. It's like I work in movies, and they really work against you. You're just working against people. And I work in this publishing world, and I'm like, everyone believes in it, and they work with you and towards a goal, and you're like, this is fantastic. And to have all these wonderful collaborators, to be encouraged and then and supported, and then you see the finished product, and it's something you are just so happy to personally own and have and like flip through. Like, that's an amazing experience, and we want to keep replicating that for us, professionally doing this, but also most importantly for fans. I want to keep putting out the highest quality stuff that can look at Dungeons and Dragons during its 50th anniversary in unique and exciting ways. I think this team can really do a lot together. So we're all excited. We love our collaboration, and we definitely have something we're working on. So maybe look at like October 2022.
Okay.
That sounds about right. Yeah, no, let me add, you know, I hope, not only do I love working with this team and this publisher, 10 Speed has been unbelievable. I hope we can keep doing book after book after book. I mean, I think you can probably tell we approach this from passion. I don't want to say we would do this for free, because I don't want our publisher to know that. But no, I mean, we would. We do this stuff because we absolutely love it, and we spare no expense, personally in a lot of cases, to make sure that these books have everything they should have. I'll give you an example. You know, we had a bunch of D&D artifacts 3D printed for the photography sessions, because we knew to really level up the D&D experience and to bring it into our world, we needed to show things that were unique to the D&D world. So there's dragon orbs in there, and there's the Hand of Vecna. It's things like that. Again, we're, as Kyle said really well, I think, we're fans first and foremost, and we do books that we would want to buy. And that's a real major objective. By the way, I'm thrilled. I'm really excited because I just got an email, and I just checked it out myself. If you saw me look away, I guess we are 4 weeks on the New York Times list just as of this evening. So,
well, there you go.
I can't believe it myself. I'm like, well, I can't. Wow. So
wow.
It's
and all
this
of you
thing
in the
has.
chat, if you haven't bought it, please go out and buy it. Tomorrow's Black Friday, or well, no, Friday is Black Friday. I don't know what day it is.
Tomorrow's the day you cram turkey.
Well, it's like I'm spending Thanksgiving at home with my cats, so it's like it's another day, you know.
No, this thing has been a dream come true on every respect. I think it's been completely unexpected for us, and in all the best ways. And again, I hope, you know, anyone that if you cook at a level 1 level or at a level 9 level, whatever it might be, I think there is something in here for you if you like D&D, because there's things to learn about these different cultures, and again, just new ways to connect. We've been thrilled to be a part, certainly.
Well, before we wrap it up, is there anything you guys want to shout out or, you know, let people know before we sign off here? I mean, I know you guys are all working on a million different things, I'm sure. Anything in particular?
Gosh, I feel like we're all, there's the NDA look again. I think
know,
we're all
I'm
working
like,
on
this
stuff
is
we
my
can't talk
life.
about.
I'm like, I can't talk about anything I'm doing. It's fine.
It's classified.
Well,
I'm sorry.
To talk. We're always down to talk. We're all collectively on Twitter. I'm Kyle_Newman on Twitter and on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook at like Facebook Kyle Newman fan page. You want to post recipes and talk D&D? I'm always around. Like I said, we're working on something new collectively. I'm working on a new movie, which I'm excited about, which for BuzzFeed and for Lionsgate, and that's in the world of gaming, girl gamers. Pretty cool. So I'm excited about that, but that won't be, that's a year away from probably being, you know, we start shooting on Monday. So I'm in the thick of it, but that's, you know, those projects take a long time, just like books do. Yeah. So doing that, and you know, these guys are wonderful resources online. John has a blog, and he posts some of the most amazing. Recently, he's been posting on just like the history of dice, looking at that archaeologically. It's incredible. So you should tell them exactly where that is, John, because that stuff like that is just great. If you're into things like cookbooks and D&D, then you're definitely gonna love like John's blog.
I mean, so I write really crunchy, like academic stuff about the history of D&D. And so, I mean, for example, I have a book coming out in December that's called The Elusive Shift with MIT Press, which I have a couple of books coming out with them actually in the next couple of years. But that's about kind of like the first people who started using the term role-playing game and what they thought it meant. But, things like dice, they're a little more accessible. You can find that. I have a blog that's called Playing at the World. It's named after my first book. Or if you're really interested in like, I found a die in like my uncle's D&D set from the 1980s, and like, can I figure out, is this a rare die? Like, how does it work? Things like that. That's something I've been posting a lot about recently. So you can definitely look it up on playingattheworld.com. Thank you, Kyle.
And for me, again, you can always find me at Mike Whitwer on Twitter. I've actually been working on a middle grade young adult kind of fantasy series myself that I'm hoping to land in the right place sooner or later here. So again, I think we all have a number of projects kind of on the side that we hope to see the light of day sooner or later. But again, thrilled to be work with these people again, and there will be more coming from us for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys again so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. We really appreciate it. And I know we'd all love to talk with you again because you just have so much knowledge. Genevieve, we have the giveaway, which is...
Yes, today we have a giveaway, and to be eligible to get that raffle, type feast in the chat. So code feast to be entered into the raffle. Stay till the beginning of the Realms of Ukador in order to see who the winner is. Again, thank you guys for joining us. So it was fantastic. We really enjoyed having you guys on. And I am very excited to start cooking.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.